Turn ideas into gold. Let the magic unfold. Every story to be told makes the world a place.
Welcome to Beyond the Blueprint. I'm so excited to have you here with us. We have Edie Weintraub, and she is a real estate powerhouse. She's over on the East Coast, and I want to just share this time with you guys, with her, and dive into everything exciting that she is doing. Edie, welcome. So excited to have you.
Thank you so much for having me, Bryn. It's great to be here.
So I wanted to talk to you a little bit about all the things that you've got going on. You've got Terra Alma, you've got like restaurant community for women. You got a lot of things going on. So tell us a little bit about that. How did you get into real estate and spaces and all of that?
Yeah, I think it goes back to just discovering my love of people and bringing people together. So I loved science when I was younger, and I studied biology in college, thought that I was on track to be a dentist, and worked for my dentist and my orthodontist when I was in high school and even into college. But what I started to realize is I would make notes in the chart that Bryn's daughter had a birthday party and she was excited, but also nervous to have so many kids over. And so next time when you're in, Bryn, I would ask you, how was your daughter's birthday party? Was it a success? Was she happy? And so I started to lean more into realizing my connection to people and that dentistry wouldn't really afford me that opportunity to communicate with folks. So while I was in high school, while I was in college, especially when I moved to Atlanta, I thought I need to socialize. I need to meet people. I don't think it's appropriate for me to pay to go out. I should be paid to go out. So when I moved to Atlanta, I got a job being in promotions at nightclubs in the Buckhead area. I also worked in food and beverage. I did every role except for being a chef and bartender. And so just combining all of those pieces, one day my father said, Edie, I see that you're not going to go be a dentist, which totally is okay, but you're really good with people and maps and independent and ambitious and self-driven. And I really think you should come into real estate with me. So he offered me a position with him. I got my license, and he was into land assemblages, which to me at the time was just not very exciting. But he was very successful in assembling property, selling it off to developers, builders. For me, I started obviously like everybody else does in residential, and decided that I would rather go visit my husband somewhere else as he was working on a project rather than holding an open house. And so I thought, okay, how do I bridge my love of food and beverage with my new love of real estate? And there was a couple of companies I reached out to. I scouted out industrial, I scouted office, I scouted retail. And there was one company where I had 5 warm connections. So what did I do? Because I was on a path, I find a little crack and I just continue to crack it open further. And I communicated with those folks every single month for 18 months. So I'd send them a letter with a, hey, I'm thinking about you. I saw this opportunity, just wanted to make you aware of it. Or can I take you out to coffee? Or just little touch points that were kept me top of mind for these 5 people at this one company every single month for 18 months. So finally, I broke them down and they said, okay, Edie, we get it. You're not going to give up. You don't accept the word no. And we would be silly not to bring you on as a member of our team because we know that you are tenacious and a go-getter and that your follow-up is absolutely perfect. Yes, exactly. When I first started there, I had the pleasure of working with folks like Famous Footwear and Party City, strong national brands. All developers want them in their projects because they're credit, they bring something unique to the project. And I'd open a store and I'd look around, and this is probably like Thursday during the week, maybe it's 2 o'clock. I'd walk into Famous Footwear and I'd say, where is everybody? And I realized that one of my favorite Disney movies is The Little Mermaid, and Ariel, like me, I want to be where the people are, where they're laughing and they're dancing.
Yeah.
And so I thought, oh, maybe I could bring in my entertainment, nightclub, food and beverage into this world of real estate. And so from then on, I focused 100% on entertainment, community building, and food and beverage because that's where the people are. That's where the energy of any place is, where others are gathering.
Not so much hanging out at the footwear stores, right?
No. And this was in the mid 2000s. So this was really before e-commerce, online sales got big, but I just saw that for those folks to be open 7 days a week from 11 to 9 p.m., more often than not, people are buying things if they need to try on shoes or clothes or whatnot in their leisure time. And the majority of us at that time were working traditional 8 to 5 roles. And so when we have leisure time is maybe after work, maybe at
Mhm.
lunch, but mostly on the weekends. And so I just wanted to lean into places where people gather and see them break bread and smile and laugh together.
Yeah, no, and that's interesting too, because the way that things have shifted since post-pandemic, all the new technology and everything, I think we've broken away from bigger brands in general. At least that's what I've been seeing in the Houston area. I think especially too with political climate, regardless of which side we're on, but I think there's just this mental shift. And for someone like you, your women-owned business, your whole team, you've got a team of ladies, powerhouse women, you're Okay. working with these
Well, yeah, so
emerging
we'll go ahead and
businesses. A lot of times these smaller businesses can face a lot of challenges that the bigger box stores, the national brands don't face. So how do you navigate that? And have you found that it's been like a differentiator in a positive way for you?
For sure. Yes, it certainly makes it more complicated because more often than not, developers are building spaces and turning them over in a shell condition, which means no HVAC, sometimes no storefront, a lot of times no floor, even, right? It's a dirt floor. And then we have what's called a ribbon slab, which is where the walls meet the floor. And so you do have that edge, but the challenging part is that a lot of these local brands, they don't have a construction team. They don't have an architecture team. They don't have money sitting around and time to manage a project where they're building out a new space. So we find a lot of our clients end up considering what we call second generation restaurant spaces, where the walk-ins already there, the hood's already there, the bathrooms are already built out, and they're just coming in and maybe redoing the aesthetics in the space. So really trying to help educate a lot of these developers and landlords on how to create spaces that foster local talent has been a little bit of an uphill battle because it requires them investing more time and money into delivering a vanilla box space where, again, those operators come in and they just put their
Mhm.
fixtures in and their design in. But I really think there's something special to that because a lot of municipalities, sadly, are so excited to hear mixed use and they push for retail at the base of office or residential or hotel. And sadly, it doesn't need to be there. And so I've been working with kind of the show Restaurant Impossible, right? Where a restaurant is struggling and you've got to figure out how to fix it. So I feel like sometimes we're brought in for Retail Impossible, where there's vacant space at the base of a building and the owners have not been able to lease it. Either they went in because they had incentives to an emerging market and the retail hasn't followed them because it's still not 100% to the community a safe area to be in. So how can we
Mhm.
activate those spaces in the interim before maybe having a permanent tenant in there? Can we do something at a creative level? Can we host a pop-up dinner? Can we bring in a artist? Can we put in a maybe an artist in residence that's coming in there and actually fabricating work, maybe as a ceramicist and
Mhm.
maybe firing in a kiln off site, but maybe creating this creative space that allows people, again, those perhaps residents above to get a chance to know each other. What I find is if you have the right coffee shop, and coffee is not a big money maker, no matter what anybody says, but it's a beautiful space to create community. And what happens, is, Bryn, if you and I start to see each other often downstairs, we live upstairs. Oh, I saw you the other day. Your hair looks different. How are you doing today? Like we start to create that relationship, that bond, that trust. And then that happens with the barista at the coffee shop. They go, "Oh, Bryn, you want a double espresso shot of cream and a splash of hazelnut, don't you?" And
Yeah,
just
did you
have that,
know?
there you go, just to have that warmth, that connection. It makes it that much harder for those residents or even the tenants in the office building to want to consider to move somewhere else because you've built that connection point.
No, and I think community is often one of those terms that can feel really nebulous, especially when, like for you and I, we're on the creating side. So, how do you create community? And when you think about community, it's very organic, right? And so we can create the containers, but what are the key ingredients to making sure that when we create a space that the people who are coming in there are actually experiencing the type of community features that we want them to?
Yeah, I think it's about making a space that's inviting, right? I love a food hall I had a chance to work on where it's an industrial building and we converted it into a food hall. We did 32 stalls in it and it's got tall ceilings, it's got beautiful natural light coming in. But one of the features that we add is we had an artist harvest vines from a local forest and we wrapped those metal pillars with the vines. And so you softened up that space by bringing in the wood texture and feel. And obviously, as those vines dried out, they hardened around those poles. The other piece is just greenery and again, natural light and soft seating, inviting spaces where there's multiple vignettes for people who just basically are given the canvas to come sit and be a part of what I love. And it took me a little while to work myself through this because it's not something I grew up with, but there was a restaurant in New York City that I went to and basically there was one table and there was little sections that it would open and move along, but at the end of the day you're sitting next to strangers, and what I found is that they would order something and it was perhaps me and a friend sitting across from one another at dinner and they happened to be next to me, these strangers, and something came by and I go, man, that looks really good, what is that? And they go, oh yeah, this is eel on top of this and blah blah blah, you want a piece? And I go, here this is the strangers offering me a piece of their sushi, but you're not able to have those experiences unless you're proximate to others. And I think, sadly, while I love technology, it allows us to do things like this, right? You're a couple hours away by plane and by mileage, but here we are connecting on the computer after, of course, we had a chance to meet in real life. I love the tools of technology, but I am 100% bullish on analog experiences that we need to make sure we're integrating those into our lives much more so than the digital experience.
Yeah, for sure. I think the physical, the tactile, the experiential, when we can engage all of the senses, there's definitely something to that, right? Because like you're saying, right now we're on video, we're on audio, but there's no aroma of coffee. Nobody's making croissants in the background. I could have my husband whip some up maybe, but that's not part of that experience. I think it's really interesting too. So when you talk about creating a place and these ideas of community, like how do we when we go into a community and we say, what do you want? A lot of times, the people that we're asking may not have that longevity in mind. They may not have that overall vision. So, how do we balance what they want versus that visionary mind that we have of saying, what could that place be? How do we balance those things so that we're not telling them what they want and how to live their life, but we're inviting them into a story?
For sure. I love giving people the opportunity to share, not only with their words, and sometimes their words, because they're not in our field, might not be the right words, but describing a space. And more often than not, anytime my team and I are involved in any kind of design charrette, it is pictures, right? The more you travel, the more you're exposed to, the more you're able to pull into your toolkit and share with others. So if someone is there at perhaps one of these community meetings and they're trying to explain something that they would like to see, if they can't verbalize it, ask them and invite them to share a picture, send you pictures. And so that way we could put it up on the screen. Again, this is where we get to pull technology in our favor and maybe have a shared screen where it says, hey, go ahead and send us your picture. We'll pull it up on the screen. What do we love about this? What do we not like about this? Oftentimes, when we're working on design charrettes, we put green dots on things that we like and red dots on things that we don't. And we go into those meetings contemplating, hey, who are we? What do we want to be? And let's also make sure what we know that we don't want to be, because that is as important as what it is we want to be. Because sometimes the nots will then open up the what we want. Maybe we just didn't have the words, the picture or whatnot, but we definitely know that we don't want that. So I think that visually storytelling, sharing those experiences of places that they've been, that they feel good in, that they want to emulate in their backyard is very important.
Yeah, for sure. And I think the ownership aspect of it, when they're invited in to participate in the conversation, it gives them that sense of ownership and that their voice is being heard. And sometimes that's just the
Enough,
basic. Just
of
I am
course.
being listened to, and that's enough. Not saying that that's where we should stop, but I think that's done. For the exercises that we've gone through and the communities that we've met with, listening is so important. And as we see all these different technologies coming in, AI, and the shift away from rigid workplace, rigid, like you have your 1 hour lunch. Now everything is a lot more ambiguous. So, how do we see spaces changing and adapting, incorporating more technology perhaps, or embracing that? What does the gathering space of the future start to look like?
Yeah, I think it's just allowing a good partnership between the public realm and the private realm. I think, sadly, I was just talking to an academic the other day about how, unfortunately, a lot of our gathering spaces have been pushed down to private businesses, so restaurants and coffee shops. And, there's just not enough civic public space for us to have these experiences in. I really loved last year when I was able to travel, I was in Barcelona, and Barcelona, I think, has just done an amazing job of creating these public spaces that
Mhm.
have maybe a museum in the middle of it, or just this gathering space that really speaks to kids, but it's not a traditional playground. It's more like climbing spaces and places for them to be active, but not the traditional like slide and pull and things like that. And it's almost offering itself to be an adult playground in a way too, because it
Okay.
just has these rolling hills that you could just sit out there with a book and just be around others without necessarily having or wanting to maybe even interact with them. But one of the areas that they had created was just like this little circle, and it rose to the top like a dome, and they allowed the vines to climb up. And then they just had a couple of benches inside. So I think sometimes if you just provide that palette and give people places to gather, but offering perhaps different experiences within those spaces, just as you and I both know, restaurants are meant to have some variability in them. So you want the height perhaps of some bar stools that are up to the bar, but then you want some traditional tables that are just regular height. And then maybe there's some elevated seats or group seats where you're offering a variety of different experiences just within that
Mhm.
one restaurant, because maybe one day you'll go and you're like, oh man, that was really good. And then the next time you go back, maybe you're seating in a different area. So you have a different perspective in terms of your view and what you're taking in from that position within the restaurant.
Yeah, no, that makes a lot of sense. And I think as human beings, we crave variety and novelty. And so I think there's a balance, though, between all things novel and that familiarity and that comfort. And it's such an interesting thing when we talk about community and placemaking and spaces. You think about the neighborhoods who, yeah, for Houston, here's a good example. We have the bayou that runs through the middle of the city. And for the longest time, we had Allen Parkway was this road that was right up next to the bayou. And so it was really difficult to actually get to the nature areas. And there was a time at which the city said, let's shift the road over. And there was such an outcry. Oh, it's gonna take longer to get to work by 2 minutes. But now that it's in place and you see how it's being utilized and the people who are there and it's amazing to see, but all these different components, plus the vision, plus the funding, there's so many components that come together. And so, when we think about the power of place, do you think that there's any kind of like magic pixie dust that really ties everything together, or is every single space different and we just have to shake the box and kind of see what comes out? Like, how do we make sure that we can create places that will be successful?
Yeah. I continue to go back and have a fascination and a love with Savannah and having the central gathering park of Forsyth Park. You've got the water fountain, but on the weekends, you've got farmers markets, and the city of Savannah is great. You get like a license to share your art in the middle of the park, and you're not allowed to get paid for your product, but you can accept a donation. And so here, just on a random day when I'm down there showing space to a client of mine, I'm walking through the park and I get to see these artists and I get to see these poets, and then stop for just to watch people go by. So I think just having that open canvas where people can figure out what they want to do, I think is very welcome. But at the same time, a community like Savannah also has these public parks strewn throughout the entire city. And so you are likely, if you're close to the water, no less than 10 minutes away from a green space where it's shaded. You can sit on a bench, you can just enjoy being outside. I think that gives us an opportunity to reconnect and balance from our digital experience. But then leaning into new construction and creating these spaces, I think deeper sidewalks that allows for a patio to spill out. I think during the pandemic, we all realized how much we love seeing others gather on a patio. And it's almost like a blue light for bugs, right? You see all these people on the patio, you go, oh, I need to go eat at that restaurant. I've never known that it was so popular. And I see people. And so I want to be over there with them. The other part of it is from just an urban planning perspective, making sure that those patios and those deeper sidewalks don't then cross the street into the backside of maybe an apartment building where you've got the loading docks, because then that energy that you're creating on that patio just dissipates into nothingness. If it's possible where there's going to be another building where that patio can face the existing patio and the energy can kind of bounce off across the street to one another, that is hugely impactful. And I think a better way of doing it, if at all possible, to contemplate, like you said, what's next? What's the long term? How can we plan our cities and communities better so that we do create these nodes where people gather? Because I think that's the hard part. You can't just create 10 nodes where people can gather. It's good to have some confluence of all of that coming together, because then that's what creates the energy and then the ripple effect.
Yeah, for sure. And I think at the city scale, there's that responsibility, right? And it's so difficult because it's so long term, it's so slow moving. Right now, Houston is unveiling their plan for the convention center downtown and how the park is going to be connected. So I don't know if you've seen this. It's really cool.
Yes.
Up when we put this online, but they have the George R. Brown Convention Center. Right now, it looks like the Carnival cruise ship parked dry docked at the 59 elevated freeway. And so many times, freeways, different natural bodies can be these barriers. And so a lot of times people don't feel comfortable crossing them. And so what we want to do is try to connect to the east side of downtown with the main downtown area. And so they want to actually remove a section of the convention center, make that a thoroughfare of greenway that would connect. They're going to be burying the freeway, put a park on top. And the urbanist in me is just clapping and celebrating, getting so excited about this.
Yeah.
But it's going to be so long. And I think that's one of the challenges that we see when we tell a community it's going to be amazing, and they're like, yeah, but I have to deal with 10 years of construction and all that. That's so hard, that messy middle. So I think one way that we can start to, foster this idea that it's worth it is because of globalism. We can point to these other cities and say, look how they've done it and look how amazing and successful it is. And so I think when we start to use these other places that have been successful and show it, I think that's helpful. But how do we define success, right? Is there a metric? Is it a number, or is it a feeling? And then how do we communicate that back to the stakeholders in a community?
Yeah, I think you don't have to look very far in Houston that there was a project that was successfully done that's very similar to what you've just described, is Clyde Warren Park, where they capped the highway and they opened up this green space. And from that, you had this amazing ripple effect of development. And that just providing this green space became a magnet for people to come together, but also for additional development to spur from that. So I think, again, going back to kind of visuals and pictures and case studies and sharing with them, even in Atlanta here, we have the Beltline, it was a master's thesis by Ryan Gravel that said, hey, we've got all these rail lines. Let's get rid of the rail and bring them back together on this green space, this walking path, biking path, and maybe add some light rail down the road. And I think it's been immensely successful just because where the first section was, where the Beltline was created, allowed and already had so many things in motion from a development standpoint that it rose property values. The challenging part is that the locals, to use it Monday through Thursday, and then all of the tourists that are coming in, and I say tourists even to the effect of suburbanites who live in Metro Atlanta, but maybe don't have the opportunity to come to the Beltline as often, are coming in from other parts of the city and coming to the Beltline and just being outside and walking and biking and bar hopping and just getting a chance to experience an urban lifestyle, maybe without opting to live here full time. And so you find a lot of locals get somewhat irritated on Friday, Saturday, and Sunday because their mode of transportation, maybe they're not using because all of a sudden there's this gathering of people that makes it really busy, especially in beautiful spring and summer and fall days. We
Yes.
are probably, like you mentioned, from a timing perspective, another 2 years away from having the Beltline fully complete, where will be 22 miles that circumnavigates the city that connects 45 different neighborhoods. So I think we all, just even in little pieces, have been able to see successes and been able to celebrate those successes. I am not a huge football fan, but I am in favor of my Atlanta Falcons. And sadly, when we played the Patriots, we were up at halftime. And then we, I think, celebrated too early. And the Patriots were able to come back because they celebrated every single little win. And if you celebrate every single little win, then you get to the point where you're celebrating at the end. And so I think it's important to remember that even though this project is going to take a good deal of time in Houston, if there's opportunities to celebrate those little wins along the way, then it keeps that momentum going. It keeps everybody excited about it, and they know that final result will be worthwhile.
Yeah. I love your opinion too, because Houston is hot and humid. Atlanta, hot and
Yes,
humid. Do
agreed.
you find that I guess there's this attitude in Houston that, oh, people don't go outside. Oh, it's too hot. Oh, it's miserable. But from where we are, I live in the middle of the city and there's people outside all the time. So is this just maybe like a false narrative that we've been telling ourselves, or is there something unique maybe about Atlanta that is drawing people and inviting them outside, maybe that we could start to implement over here? Because I'd love to have more people out there walking, biking, doing all this.
Yeah. We have an amazing group that started a foundation called Trees Atlanta. And their goal is to have the largest tree canopy in the world. And it's focused on other parts of Metro Atlanta, of course, but it is really focused on bringing back local species to the Beltline and creating a shade structure so that you can be out, but if you're shaded and the temperature is brought down by having these trees and xeriscaping and things that are good, but maybe don't require a lot of water. I think that's been immensely impactful because it renews our sense of self by going and getting fresh air and vitamin D and being around others when we choose to either be back or engaged. And I think that is something that is immensely important. I think Atlanta got a bad rap with being called Hotlanta. And yes, I agree. I've been to Houston. It gets a little sticky, hot, but if we can be cognizant to provide those shade structures or means for the landscaping to help bring down the intensity of the sun or the wind or whatnot, I do feel like there's ways for us to design better places to encourage people to be out. It sometimes takes a little bit more money, but at the end of the day, I think it's a smart investment.
Yeah, I would love to see like a lazy river transit system. That'd be so fun. But yeah, no, I think there's a lot of opportunities that face that uphill challenge because not only attitudes but funding, right? And that's one of the biggest barriers I think to community driven development because so much of it is going to be donation based.
Sure.
And so how do we rally around the types of nonprofits and the donors? Like, how do we get those conversations going in our city? There's a big push right now for us to build a natatorium. Like, how is it that Houston does not have a really amazing indoor swimming place, right? And so the Memorial Park has been under redevelopment. They've been doing so many amazing improvements between the Eastern Glades and this kind of natural pond. They've got these giant land bridges that go over Memorial Drive. And just seeing people out there, knowing how hot and humid it is, we need a swimming hole. And so how do we find those people and connect them and make them excited and get them to give their money and build this thing?
Yeah, I can speak from firsthand experience because my boys, 14 and 12, for whatever reason, they have both chosen water sports. So my oldest is a swimmer and a water polo player. My youngest is in rowing. So all of that obviously convenes around whether it's a swimming pool or a river or a lake or whatnot. And so I've had firsthand experience traveling for some of these tournaments for either swimming or water polo. Pools are very expensive.
Mm.
One, obviously, to initially construct, but also to then maintain. However, it is also, I feel, extremely lucrative because in any event where you've got swimmers or water polo players coming together, oftentimes it's a travel sport, right? These are club teams. These families are paying to travel for their kids to excel in these sports. And I went through just the calculation of the $20 to get in the door for every day that I'm there as a spectator, then the money that I'm spending on behalf of my kid to pay towards going to that pool and the coaches and all of that. I feel like it's a really good investment for any city can contemplate that because this is a very high profile sports in that,
Yeah.
yes, it could benefit the local population by having swimming lessons and taking care of the community. Maybe that's a portion of it, but these events and sports and teams add so much collectively to the community because we all need to eat. That's 3 meals a day. We need a hotel to stay in. Sometimes these folks are booking their student athletes with an extra day before or after because they're like, I'm here, I'm stuck in this natatorium all day long. I want to go like experience what Houston has to offer. Maybe I can add on another day to this weekend tour and stay and do something else in the city. So I think that at the end of the day, the economic impact for adding a natatorium has a ripple effect throughout the community that should seriously be considered. We were in Dallas last year, and I think we went back and forth between two pools for a 3-day long tournament. And there was over 70,000 people that one weekend for that tournament. I think that's something that should be explored more fully.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm definitely behind it as well because my daughter is a swimmer. I was a swimmer. It's just
Yeah.
one of those great sports, and there's a ton of that in Houston. So let's talk a little bit about World Cup. All right, it's
Yes.
it's coming. Cities across the United States are preparing. How do we make sure that the things we're building, it's not just for that one event? Because we see this all the time with Super Bowl, the Olympics, right? All of these kind of sporting events that come, and we have all this infrastructure, all this money poured in. And then a lot of times, what we've seen over the past several decades is that those areas are completely abandoned. So, how do we make sure that when we go and build something that's very specific, either time or place specific, how do we make sure that it continues to flourish?
Yeah. We had that experience here in Atlanta. Actually, my family decided to move because of the 1996 Olympics from New
Mhm.
Jersey to Atlanta. They pulled me in a couple of years later, but I got to see how our baseball stadium was rebuilt and for the Braves. And recently, in the last 10 years or so, the Braves said, hey, we'd love to stay here, but I think we're deciding to shift a little bit. So they still technically are in the city of Atlanta, but they moved about 20 minutes northwest up the road, and then they ended up creating their own like mixed use development around the stadium. The stadium that was built for them ended up converting to a stadium for Georgia State. And so now we've got baseball and football for that university. So I think just thinking through, yes, let's build for the event, but what is the long term strategy? And I think all too often, just as a society, we're not contemplating what happens after as much as we are contemplating what happens for the moment. So I
Mm.
think having a greater conversation and knowing what that evolution could be for is very important. I think just bringing in kind of the stakeholder holders that could be a part of the conversation earlier rather than later.
Yeah, no, I think that that's definitely part of it is the conversation. And I think also the attitude, again, that perspective shift. I think those are the maybe the grassroots conversations that need to be had beforehand and during and after. And I think also like the shift in perspective that we're seeing within retail environments, right? So there's this different expectation on what going to a store means. And I'm sure you're all about this. What we've seen is this shift towards experience-based retail and experience-based restaurant, right? We don't want to just show up, purchase the thing and leave like the Foot Lockers, right? We want to go in and be immersed or be excited or wowed or surprised. So, what are you seeing in terms of consumer expectation shifting trends? Are these sustainable shifts, or is this kind of the flash in the pan for us?
Yeah, we've definitely seen a decrease in the number of malls, and a lot of them have either been plowed down or adaptive reuse. But the ones I think that are well located have continued to sustain. But I do admit that there is still a significant number of vacancies within those spaces. I eye them often for second generation restaurant spaces and continue to scratch my head that they would sooner let them sit vacant rather than putting in some kind of a pop up or experience or whatnot. I do feel like we had a very strong pendulum swing to digital during the pandemic in that we were inside. I felt like every single movie I've ever wanted my kids to watch, I've already been able to check off, which makes me a little sad, but also helps me remember that it's good to be out and about with the kids, whether
Mhm.
again that's rowing or hiking or walking or whatnot. But I do think that we love the art of discovery and experiencing something new, but also seeing those opportunities clustered. So I believe that variety is the spice of life. And more often than not, it's these small businesses that are the creatives and coming up with something new. So, how can we create a space to foster them coming together? I grew up being in love with flea markets. And I think back in the day, flea markets where maybe people had like junk to share or things that they had collected, or maybe not a lot of new things, but there's been a couple of spaces that have come up that are mercantiles for emerging artists who maybe are not the best at selling their product or don't want to be there, like sitting in a space waiting for a sale. They'd rather be creating. And so I think
Mhm.
providing a canvas for them to either have a market, right? A farmer's market or an artist market or a night market. I think to know that it's impermanent, I think
Mhm.
drives more people there because then they have the fear of missing out that they didn't get a chance to go. So I think experiences like that are unique and special for my family and I. There's an event every fall called Dragon Con, and to me, it's like the opening of fall where everybody's in costume, even in advance of Halloween. But it's also a chance to just see the creativity of these artists and experience joy just being around others and seeing what cool costumes they come up with. So, from a placemaking, arts, music, activation, I think again, leaning back into those senses and being able to be around others and smell those croissants baking and listen to the jazz music in the background. I'm actually very excited. I'm working with one of my clients who's a restaurateur, but I was approached by a property owner who loves jazz and was creating a listening room. And he said, Edie, I know music, I know artists, I know spaces, but I don't know restaurant operators. And I really would like to hire you to find a restaurant operator for us. And I said, oh, perfect. I happen to know two really amazing restaurant operators who both have a immense love and respect for music. One of them actually started in music, but then realized, I want to have a family. I don't want to necessarily travel around the world. I'm going to go into food and beverage. Maybe
Mhm.
not the best for supporting a family because restaurants, obviously, you're working nights and weekends and
Yeah.
all of that. But at the very least, you have food to take back to your family. So, this one particular operator started as a musician, ended up in food and beverage. And so, when this property owner said, hey, I want to open a jazz club and I need a restaurant operator, I said, I have the perfect people to introduce you to. And so now
Mhm.
the leases are signed and we are under construction. And so the musician is going to be offering the listening room. My client's going to be offering the food and beverage, but also having those connections himself to music. The two of them are collaborating on other opportunities. So it's really beautiful to be able to provide that space where you're coming to listen to music and traveling artists in an intimate setting while also having phenomenal food and beverage.
Yeah, that sounds amazing. Man, I love those kind of mashups where you have somebody who has an interest and a love and a passion, and then they all come together. It makes my heart happy.
Yes. Yeah. Can't
Yeah.
wait
So
to tell you all about it.
when we talk about landlords and we talk about tenants, it's like it's a matchmaking experience, right? And so everybody has to get along, have that similar vision. Obviously, the numbers have to work. And so when we're talking about these emerging businesses, we talked about this a little bit at the beginning, but What are the conversations like when you approach the property owner, the landlord, and you say, "Hey, I have this really great idea of a temporary rotating type of space." What are the reactions and how do we make that make sense financially, right, for the landowner? And then also, how do we make it make sense for these emerging businesses coming in who maybe this is their first business and they've got a really steep learning curve? How do we marry those things up?
Yeah, for me, I secret shop all of our restaurant tenants before we work with them. So for the most part, I want to make sure they've got an operating business. It's something that's tangible. You can see, touch, and feel. You can understand that they've got operational experience. So when I'm going to these landlords and I'm opting to do a pop up, I'm bringing established brands to them. From an emerging brand standpoint, more often than not, we're encouraging those folks to go into a food hall because they need to perfect their service and their timing of their food, but maybe don't have the bandwidth to lean into perfecting their marketing or their social media strategy. And so if they're in a food hall, they're able to leverage that collective gathering space because you might be going to this particular food hall, Bryn, because your daughter's, oh my gosh, I want this po' boy. I saw it on social media. I need to go have it. But maybe you're just not in the mood for seafood that day, but you agree to go because she can get her po' boy and you can get a phenomenal fish taco or chicken taco or birria or something like that. And so everybody's getting their own choice of food, but those spaces work perfectly to incubate emerging talent or to allow sous chefs that might have worked for someone else that haven't had their own space open yet to come in and run their own space, but collectively share in janitorial, in marketing, in someone else running the bar. So they can start to learn that operational experience and then be able to move that into having their own brick and mortar. So it acts as an incubator. I love working with emerging brands. We have successfully scaled one of those operators in a food hall from having just a little cookie warmer on the bar at opening day into a stall that she shared with one other operator that was candy on one side and her cookies on the other side. But her sales were so strong that when a space came open behind her, she said, I want that space. We moved her into that space. And now we've moved her into another brick and mortar space. We've moved her into a commissary kitchen. And then she just opened her second brick and mortar. And she is just a dynamic individual who coincidentally is allergic to flour. So when she is making cookies, she is wearing this like hazmat mask
Oh my
because she
gosh.
loves making cookies, but she's allergic to it. So it is just the most awe-inspiring conversation to hear her story and also to be part of her successive success.
Oh, absolutely. That's an amazing story. And I think that's probably why you and I do these types of deals. And what gets me excited is just watching these business owners come in and succeed and just absolutely thrive. They're crushing it. And it's so exciting. So, how much of that do you think is like individual personality and drive versus the container or the space that they're going into? How do we make sure that mix is right?
Yeah, I think a lot of the times is I just like you, I'll do a deep dive with my client and say, what is your ideal customer? Where is your ideal customer? What do you enjoy doing? Because we want you to do more of that. If there's something you don't enjoy, how can we build
Mhm.
your team to offload the stuff that you don't enjoy? For me, when I first started my own company, I realized I don't love spreadsheets. And I don't love looking at the bank accounts, right? Like I just want to do business development, take care of my clients and do deals and all of that. So very early on, I realized that I did not like doing that stuff. And so I said, I got to find a partner who likes doing that stuff and maybe doesn't like doing what I do. So that way we can both be in our zone of genius and collectively make a better company. So I think everyone is very unique and it takes the time to interview them and understand how they want to move forward, but then also bringing into that your expertise, my expertise to help guide them to what the project space opportunity really should be for them at that moment. That's not to say, just like we talked about the food hall operators, that food hall operator was so successful that she just slowly kept growing and then was ready to do more. And we admittedly have a couple clients who say, oh, I want to do this and I want to do that and I want to do this. And we say, hold up. We just want to make sure that you've built your team and you've planted your roots and you've got the right foundation. Yeah, we're commission only. We're paid by more deals, but we also want to make sure that our clients are successful because it gives us so much pride to see them grow thoughtfully and strategically and to be part of their team and celebrate them brag about them, but we want to make sure that they're doing it in the right way where they're not taking on more than they can handle.
Yeah, for sure. Last question for you. What is the future for Terra Alma and where are you going? What do you see for the rest of this year? What about next year? What is on the exciting horizon for you guys?
Absolutely. I am very proud to have fostered the growth and success of four amazing women that I get the pleasure of working with day in and day out. And so we are looking to add more teammates to Terra Alma and grow the company. And then two of our existing folks have leaned heavily into business brokerage. We are watching what has been called the great tsunami of the baby boomer path that these folks, for whatever reason, their kids don't want to take over their businesses, but they are ready to retire and move on to something else. So we see significant synergy with leveraging that service line to balance out the needs of our clients who, again, going back to those emerging brands, it's so much easier to walk into a second generation restaurant and maybe just rebrand knowing that the HVAC and the walk-in cooler is there. And maybe they're stepping into tables and chairs that they can reupholster in order to bring their brand to light. So very excited for us later this year to lean heavily into the business brokerage world and servicing our clients in that fashion.
So exciting. I love it. Thank you, Edie. It's been a pleasure having you, and I can't wait to share this episode with the listeners.
Thank you so much, Brenda. It's been a pleasure being here.